Welcome to this talk on terminology repairs made plain. This one is going to be non-technical, but it's one of the hardest topics, I think, in software because it is all about understanding your domain and trying to get clarity, trying to get over assumptions. And we're going to talk a bit about some of this. I had a different name, Taming Terminology Pain. I didn't know if that appealed more to people. I don't know. So pick your title. Make your own up if you want. That's fine. I am John Connolly. I started this company, Articulate Domain, after about 25 years worth of software development. And this summer, I started Domain-Driven Design United States over in America. And we're starting to build a community of practice around domain-driven design. Today, I want to confess, I am a type of vehicle driver. What type of vehicle driver I am is a subjective idea. My wife and I love to drive the Oregon coast. This is a beautiful place. I don't know if you've ever been down Highway 101 ever, but if you ever get the chance, that's an amazing place. When we were dating, we had a very different experience when we were driving on this road. I felt like we had a fun time. She felt like she was going to die. Me as a driver defined. My personal view, I'm a controlled driver. I'm somewhat aggressive, I agree. I'm safe because I've driven for over 30 years and nobody has died yet. Sandy is my wife. Her view of me, I'm spastic, I'm crazy, I should have my driver's license revoked, nearly killed us on more than 50 occasions, and must have had actual angels protecting me and everyone around me. Wonder how I have not died yet. Then there's the general public view. Some minor accidents are on file and generally safe enough, and there's just no reason really to revoke my license yet. So the terminology of what's a good driver, we're going to get to this because clearly there was a terminology mismatch between my wife Sandy and I. But it wasn't so clear at first. We didn't know that we had a difference of opinion on what it meant to be a good driver or a bad driver. So today we're going to talk about some foundational considerations about terminology and as it relates to especially software, because that's why we're here. Terminology mismatch case study will be on the agenda, as well as resolving some of my driving issues. We're going to look at this process that I use called R3, that I created this for my clients: recognize, resolve, and rectify. And we're going to take a look at a tool that implements this called the terminology mismatch map. Then we'll work on some final thoughts and questions if you have any at the end. All right, foundational considerations. This gets a little bit deep, deep in mud. How many here work in a big ball of mud? Got 1, 2, 7, 10, 20. Okay, we've got a few. All right. Legacy. These are terms, big ball of mud and legacy, that we deal with. I've come to believe that legacy is actually unmaintainable software with relevant features written in a modern language, not legacy. That's not legacy. Unmaintainable software with relevant features written in a modern language isn't legacy, it's just messed up. And you guys know Uncle Bob Martin? Know who he is? He says, a mess is not a technical debt. A mess is just a mess. Technical debt decisions are made based on real project constraints. They are risky, but they can be beneficial. The decision to make a mess is never rational. It's always based on laziness and unprofessionalism, and has no chance of paying off in the future. A mess is always a loss. And this tells me that technical debt has a different definition terminology-wise than what I think we're normally used to. Think about that a little bit. What would technical debt be if it's not hard to maintain code. For me, I look at that as a legacy and technical debt as two different things that are very related. But technical debt is more about skipping features and doing other features or MVP features, real MVP features, in a quality way. So technical debt means we're not going to do certain features. It doesn't mean we're going to do features in a poor code base. And legacy for me is all those features now are no longer needed. Not that I can't maintain them. That's just my definition. You might have a different one. But let's move on to other considerations. Why does software get messy? Along with poor planning, cutting corners, or taking shortcuts during development can lead to messy code, technical debt, and other issues contributing to software entropy. On the other hand, by taking a systematic and deliberate approach, developers can build well-designed, well-architected, and scalable software. Entropy. How many of you heard the term entropy? Yes, so software entropy is a big deal. It came from a different world, thermodynamics, and the idea is that basically heat really only transfers to cold, not the other way around. It's a one-way process. My understanding of the big ball of mud is software unmaintained is naturally moving towards the big ball of mud. It's a natural one-way process. We have to put human effort into preventing that. So one critical aspect of software is the terminology we use, especially the meanings of domain ideas. They can get lost and do not get clearer without effort. As software professionals, our job is to know what words and phrases mean before we implement those ideas. When things get fuzzy and we don't make them clearer, the system starts to lose its integrity. Then the system becomes harder to trust naturally. If you want to learn more about entropy, Adam Wasserman actually wrote a pretty good article on this as formulas, what you can change. We don't have time for that today. We're just going to move on with terminology. So there was a study, a 2-year project on a company that profited from terminology redefinition. PayFit had a 2-year project that started off with an issue in payroll. So they had different understandings of the team. They had a deep dive into their core domain payroll, and misunderstandings became transparent. I'm taking these little clips from their case study. If you read the whole case study, it has a lot there, but you start to read between the lines and realize that terminology played a huge role. Needs and interpretations in one place was it was quite easy to realize that people were actually talking about different concepts. Pay period is the widely used customer-focused term, but is missing the concept of payroll lifecycle. And what they found out is these different ideas that they thought were in the pay period, they didn't exist. There were a lot of assumptions that pay period had various abilities that it didn't have. Not just missing features, but they didn't even have the right definition. So pay period became a core term, but it was used quite fuzzily. Anybody have a domain term that when you said it, you meant one thing and somebody else heard another, and then a month later you found out they didn't quite understand what you were saying when you were telling them? Yeah. User. Helps us to improve and decouple. So what the process they went through helps us to improve and decouple the scope of teams, because now we have 2 different concepts for what used to be one big thing, the pay period, and the payroll team has full autonomy to improve the UX related to payslip previews. So this was a benefit. And the author said, I want to really emphasize that all of this happened because we focused on clarifying a single domain term. Just one term. We wanted to understand this one term. And out of that, the software actually was able to evolve, create autonomy, and make a much better product. The force we're using to get away from natural entropy. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, we'll look at this process of R3, recognize, resolve, and rectify, and how you can take steps to rectify these core terminology issues. Number one, recognize the business point of view. I can't emphasize this enough. In domain-driven design, that's what we do most of the time. We're always looking at exactly what the business is trying to accomplish. And when we're trying to resolve this, we're going to raise the conflicts between business experts and the customer, whoever that is. Maybe it's not the business expert, that's the customer. But what are the terminologies being discussed in those conflicts? It's really hard to hear those if you're not looking for it. They'll say things and ideas, but there will be a word or two that's core, it's part of the core domain, and maybe it's not quite defined. Do they have multiple words with the same meaning? I'm pretty sure we've all had this issue. We're talking about the same thing, but we're using a different word, and so we're communicating at different levels. Single words with multiple meanings, this is frustrating. Multiple words with multiple meanings, even more frustrating. And then there's transition terms, depending on a phase, meaning you might have, speaking of user, maybe user is not the best idea. Maybe you have, in a loan context, you have an applicant who becomes a borrower. It's the same person, but we're using the same term, user, to mean both phases, and we don't know exactly, when we say user, what area of the software are we talking about. And these happen very often in transactional systems where you do have kind of a long living relationship. And there's so many different ways this can happen. Hierarchies and relationships between terms. I was at a bank a couple years ago, and they had a hierarchy of terms, and those words were also replicated in IT, but the meanings were shifted down one. So when the business said term A, they thought meaning a completely different meaning, but the word was the same, so they thought they were on the same page. So when you have relationships between terms and hierarchies, maybe those aren't all exactly mapping correctly. And anything else that the business is struggling with communicating. Then we do want to recognize the technology point of view. What conflicts do developers and architects have with the business, and what are the terminologies being discussed? Those are a little bit easier to get at because we know as technologists what we're struggling with. We don't have to dig too hard, but we should dig for those. And then all of those same ideas, multiple words, single words. But this last one, what words or phrases do the technologists struggle to understand from the domain perspective? And this is a hard one. What are we willing to admit we don't know? That's kind of the first step. Like, maybe we don't know. Maybe we're assuming something here. Okay, next thing is recognize industry point of view. What related terms are already in the public domain, or at least in the vertical that informs the business? You have insurance and banking, you have accounting and finance, human resources, sciences, medical, Formula One racing. My friend over here likes Formula One. Government statutes, and many more. These industry terminologies often get overlooked when we're building software, but they already have definitions, and it can be beneficial sometimes to use them, and it can be not beneficial, but it just kind of depends on the needs of the domain. Still nice to know that we are making that decision. We're deciding not to use this particular set of definitions that are already defined and what reason that is. Okay, so once you get the terms, you want to get the definitions and usage, collect unique or conflicting definitions, assumed, desired, or implemented usage patterns. So I run into situations where the business says, I thought that the software was supposed to do this, and it looks like it's working like that, and I want to add this new feature, and the developer says, well, that's not how the software works, and we can't add that new feature because that's not even how it works. Normally, the client of mine will shut down. They'll say, that's not how it works, and we're done. I take it a step further and go, why doesn't the software work the way the domain wants. I mean, I'm not saying it should or it shouldn't. I'm just wondering, why do they think it's going in this direction and you're saying it's going in this direction? Where's this disconnect? To work with the business and IT, mind mapping, event storming, you can look up a ton of different ways to do this, and there's no prescriptive way. Get at the information, figure out what the domain is trying to do, and collaborate and let everyone have a voice. Let them also have that voice in the way that they want, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so we'll resolve terminology mismatches. Go through the process of collaborating with those involved and work through all the misunderstandings. Once you get what people are saying on both sides, on all sides, you know what they think is happening. Now we need to know what should be happening. We have all that information available. Don't settle for agree to disagree right away. Oh, they think it's this, we think it's that, we have a different opinion, that's fine, I don't care. It's not going to help the software if you really need to care. Try to understand first. Encourage everyone to face the conflicted terms. Conflict is hard, but we need to do it to get at the actual solution that we're trying to get to. And look for ways to help people participate who are not interested. Maybe you have to get different people, or maybe you have to show them the benefit of what we're trying to do. Sometimes it's a little bit of a sales job, but it's not hard to sell the idea that you want the software to actually do what the business wants, and we just need to find out what that is. All right, so once you get to that place, we know exactly what those meanings should be. We're going to ask ourselves, are we going to plan some repairs here? Who's going to repair something? Who is the person that's going to do it, or what is the team that's going to do it? What are they going to repair? How is it going to solve the problem? What pressures might encourage us to do this sooner or later? What are the potential benefits? Why are we solving this? What does this matter? It needs to actually matter. I think there needs to be some sort of justification. Why are we diving into this? And more often than not, when I'm working on these, usually I don't even know what the justification is. The business just wants new features, so they don't know why we are digging into the old stuff. Technology folks are like, I think we like to have a lot of pride and say the software is working well, and we might cover those mistakes, and it can be very political. But it'll be at the detriment of the design of the software, especially if you have to plug in new features on top of a bad design. And that's going to push entropy up. And that's going to make a system move farther to the unmaintainable state. So apply tasks already implemented to a task management system. I think this is a no-brainer. If you're already using Jira or whatever you're using, make it real by getting these tasks into the system and get them prioritized. Okay, here's some communication environment parameters. This is getting even into more soft skills. I'll go through them quickly. Does everybody have a willingness to listen to each other? Culture is hard sometimes. Does everybody want to listen? Does everybody want to speak that needs to speak? Are they free to do that? Or are they having fears of potential repercussions? Is there going to be a backlash if I say what I believe is true? I've been in environments where people are afraid to talk up. Is the emotional intelligence high or low? You have to play to the crowd and get to the information. You can do only what you can do. The values of each individual play a role. Everybody has a different value system, and that plays into the different definitions that we get for words too. Historical experience. If you have somebody that's been in a company for 30 years and they know how the domain works, they've got it, they have it tattooed on their back, they know exactly what's going on. And somebody new shows up, developer's been here 2-3 weeks, they've been in a similar business somewhere else, they have good ideas. You should listen to both. It may be that the domain expert needs to have an upgrade, and it may be that the new person who's come in has some good ideas, but they're not right for their new environment. So it kind of depends on what the domain expert wants. What's the perceived value of even doing this? Sometimes, again, justification and communication preferences. So maybe somebody is really good at writing. Maybe they want to communicate how the process works by long form storytelling. I like one-sentence descriptions. Get to it, get to the point, and move on. But there are people in my life that have to tell me for 5 minutes everything that's going on in their brain until we get to that last sentence that does answer my question. And sometimes you have to have that patience to just listen to the whole story and weed out the things you don't need and get to that gem of a piece of information. Current stressors, and obviously, and many other environmental parameters can prevent this. But it's good being aware of both the need to get this terminology, the struggles to get it, the environment, all of these things, and still pursue it, because your top goal is not to give in to all of those things, but to get good domain knowledge and get those terminologies right. All right, so I have a little tool that you can get when you get this presentation, and I'm also going to be posting this up on DDD United States as well. This is a terminology mismatch map. Basically, everything I just told you is on here, plus a couple extra things. So from left to right, you have the knowledge gathering you're gaining. And by the way, this form is not the form to use. This is just showing you a map. You can take every one of these elements and put them in a completely different form, give yourself a lot more space. You can do this all post-it note on a wall. You can do whatever you want to do. But this is just a way to remember all of these ideas of how to gather this information. So we're going to get the domain experts' terms, definitions, and usage, information, term, definition, usage in the industry. And down here, there'll be additional clarifications about what is believed about the terms that we're working on. The next section is the resolving part of it. Here are the agreements. We finally decided you have this term invoice and you have this term receipt. Are we using invoice or are we using receipt? Are we using both? Are we defining invoice and receipt differently? What is going to be the company's answer for this particular domain or this subdomain? Are we going to use invoice 3 different ways? We have warehouse, we have shipping, we have accounting, and we've got 3 different invoices, and now we want to define them exactly for what they are explicitly. And so we'd have accounting.invoice and shipping.invoice, and we know that those are in completely different areas, and we have definitions for them. And we did mess them up because as abstract artists, we put invoice all in one class, and we had no idea that an invoice wasn't an invoice. And so this is where you would do that. You would say, okay, I'm gonna make my receipt this, my invoice this, and these are the things we're gonna use it for. And everybody comes to the table and says, yeah, we like this, we're all on the same page. Okay, great. Then you go to the third section, which is the rectification. So we're going to go ahead and make some changes. We need to change this module, or we don't need to change this module. The business needs to change what they're doing, and they need to align with the software, because the software is doing it right, because we got the requirements 4 years ago from domain experts that really knew what they were doing, and now we need the business to refresh their brain because they didn't know that they were supposed to believe how the software was working was right. It kind of depends, again, on what is the truth. But if you have tasks, make them real. Put them down. Get them scheduled. Get them prioritized. Make terminology, mismatch, mapping, and repair something that affects your software so that it's moving towards maintainability, not unmaintainability. All right, so terminology resolves my driving. If it can help my driving, then it should help your software, according to Sandy. The result of ignoring it will mean that my driving probably won't get better and it may get worse. And that is the case with software. If we ignore terminology mismatch in our software, and hopefully we're using the terminology from the business in our software to help us, guide us where we're supposed to actually make changes when they want to change the business model, the software will get worse. I've never really seen it get better, and it rarely ever stays the same. So, just for humor purposes, what does it mean to drive well or not so well? We went through this process, actually, my wife and I. We went through, what does it mean to brake? What does it mean to obey the speed limit or go a little bit over? How does she feel if I'm going a little faster? When I turn, she was actually sensitive to when I turn, I'm turning too fast. I didn't know that. I know you guys think I probably drive really crazy. I don't drive really crazy. She likes to have a varying lead time, so when you turn the signal on, she wants to see at least 3 to 5 seconds. We got really specific on these definitions. And when I finally knew what she believed quality driving was, what that domain was, when I finally figured that out, and I was driving down the road, a lot of that information was spinning around in my brain, and I was going, oh, okay, I'm gonna turn, I'm gonna slowly brake, I'm gonna slowly turn, I'm gonna make the world seem a little more calm for her. And lo and behold, there was a lot of peace in our marriage after that. So I say all that to say, if you go through this process and you're pulling terminology out of the domain and you're getting that together and you're finally understanding the domain, as you're sitting there programming, you're going, but wait, I know that these definitions don't mean this anymore. I know this information. And I have been on software projects where I don't really know the information. I'm just guessing. I'm getting my best guess. Today I would use ChatGPT. Hey, maybe this means that. But is that really domain knowledge, or is that just me trying to fake it till I make it? I want to stress, don't fake it till you make it. Bring the domain experts in, find out what the knowledge is. I ask very specific open-ended questions on what do you mean by this word or phrase, and not assuming that we think the same thing, or it should be obvious. Like, I don't give a definition or a term out. I say, what do you mean by loan? What do you mean by whatever the term is? And let them go and talk about it. I don't say, do you mean this is a loan? Like, give them a definition, this is a loan? It's easier for them to say, yeah, okay, yeah, that's a loan, even if it's not. And this one's really important for high-stress environments. I've been in some aggressive environments, more aggressive than my driving, and the tensions get high, and people become upset that you don't agree with them. It's a hard place to work. I say lead by example, and don't be upset if they don't agree with you, and see where that goes. All right, so final thoughts and questions on this. One thing I will say is there's a tool that Chris Simon, I believe he's here this week. He works on this tool, Contextive, which is helping to surface a lot of this domain information out of your code. If you have domain terms in your code, and you're using Visual Studio Code, this will help. If you're using straight Visual Studio, I'm not sure when they're going to that, but or if there are other tools in other environments. But I'm really delighted to see that tools like this are coming, because we do want to be able to figure out, do we have the same semantics that the business is using inside of our code? And we could use our code as a way to see if that's truly happening in a concise way. So that's just one highlight. And that's the end. So we could do questions and answers if you want to do that, or any thoughts? What do I drive? It's not a Formula One. I drive a Toyota 4Runner. And my wife drives a BMW 335i, and she lets me drive it now. but not before we figured out all those problems. Any other thoughts?
So, do you have any advice when bringing together different domain experts and they don't agree on some term? Then usually we do the agreement, we decide what needs to be repaired, but then habits kick in, and the domain experts kind of, they don't adapt to new things. So how to combat habits?
That's an excellent question. Happens all the time. People are creatures of habit. Reminders have to be sent out sometimes. You have to look for creative ways to keep people on the same page. Somebody once told me, if you're not repeating important information that people need to remember every 3 weeks in a new way, people are going to forget and go back to what they were doing. That's an excellent question. And this particular map is something that could be not necessarily the format of this map, but the information on this map could be put in a Confluence or could be somewhere that you can always point people back to, resend out the link, and make sure people are refreshed. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns, frustrations?
Oftentimes when I talk to the business, they have business terms, but they often come up with colloquial versions of that, like slang versions of it. And have you experienced that? And what did you go with? The sort of the real term, or did you try and sort of facilitate the business by using some of the colloquial terms they're using?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things I mentioned was having multiple words for the same meaning. If they're actually doing that, then, and they just can't seem to stop the habit, in the IT world, we would go with the one that we agreed on that's the primary, and that's what would be in the software. In the collaborative meeting, if they start using a slang term or a colloquial term, we would tell them, do you mean this, really? We would keep going back to that. We'd become very aware that they're using terms like that. But it's not always the case. Sometimes the slang term has a slightly different definition. It means the same thing, but in a different context with different usage patterns. So you want to be careful not to squash the conversation on slang, because there may be new domain knowledge there. Yes?
So you adapted your driving style according to what your wife thought was meant a good driver to be, right? Since then, have you ever had a friend that might have said that you were a boring driver?
So we were going to dinner, my folks and a friend, we were going to dinner, and my wife was in the car, and we were talking about this very topic, actually. And I said, I'm going to do my best to mind my P's and Q's and drive carefully. We got to the destination for dinner half hour later, and the friend of ours pulled me aside and said, you did a great job driving. And that was the only time that I had somebody comment on my driving. But I did go with another friend about 2 months after the hard conversation. I went with another friend of ours. We had to drive to pick something up for my. I have an RV. I have a huge RV. I also drive a 35-foot vehicle, but my wife loves it because you can't turn fast in it. You can't speed up in it. It's like I'm totally restricted from driving like I normally drive in my Toyota 4Runner. Anyway, he and I were coming back from there, and he was driving his car, and he was driving crazy. He was driving sporadic. He was literally doing hard stop, like screeching up against almost. It was just, and I just started. I didn't say anything to him. But I started to realize that this must be how my wife felt, months before when I was driving really, really bad. So I don't know about any boring driving, but I don't think I've gotten that safe yet. I'm close.
Since you reframed terms for your driving and like what makes a good driver after the conversation, since you sort of reframed the terminology of like how you're driving and what makes a good driver, have you found yourself using that terminology like inside your own head, like internally?
Yes, yes. I needed to, so I could do one of two things. I could completely frustrate my wife and not adopt those terms. And this is very much like what we do with software. If we don't adopt the terms that the domain has and put those into the brain of the software, then we're not really keeping up with the domain. We're not really doing the thing that needs to be done to keep adaptive systems adaptive. And the beautiful thing about that is if the domain does change a definition legitimately, we have a new business model for something, we can take that, and we're already matched on just the previous version of that definition, and they change it slightly. We only have to change our code slightly. We don't have to refactor the whole thing because we're like, way off on our definition. So that's a great question, because driving with my wife, she wants me to always remember exactly how to brake, how to turn, how to, and I do have those mental models there now. Yes?
Do you have any tips what to do when the domain uses terms that clearly conflicts with technical terms like model, view, controller, or such?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the business really, in my humble opinion, the business really shouldn't care about the technical terms. We should really be trying to honor what the domain is trying to do to the best of our ability, and the technical side of it should be a service to that need. And so how we want to do something and what we want to do are two very different things. The business, and this is one, there was one client where the business was giving us requirements that were technical on how to build the system. And when I was brought in to do some domain refactoring and figuring out what they're trying to do, and I started to realize, actually, the technologists thought they were domain experts, and so they were trying to define what the business was doing, and the domain experts thought they were technologists, and so they were trying to tell the technologists how to build the system, and they didn't know what they swapped roles. They weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And so I had to retrain all of them to think about their expertise, their wheelhouse, work together collaboratively, get suggestions across the aisle, but still own what it is you're supposed to be doing. The domain experts really should be defining what it is we want to build. They shouldn't care about MVC. They shouldn't care about APIs. They shouldn't even know what a gateway is. They shouldn't know any of that stuff. They should just know that we need to get these functionalities into the system working in this way consistently. And the technologist should be able to go, okay, we know what you want, and this is how we're going to build it. And we're going to build it modularly, right? We're going to build it in ways where we can pull components. We may do MVC now, we might do something later, but you're still going to get the same feature. Does that make sense? Did I answer it?
Maybe. So I was more asking about when we want to use the domain term like model or something else, but we have our technical interpretation for the same word, and we want to stick to that as well.
Oh, so you're working in you're working in a space where the domain experts are actually are they a technical group? Okay, so
just if the domain also uses model, maybe for something completely different.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So when you have two different words that are conflicting, I don't know if that's a need to figure out your subdomain and why you're defining that. I would love to talk with you afterward to figure out that map. It's a little more complicated. Yeah.
You could just prepend it with domain.
The domain, yeah. Domain.model.
Yeah, you could just prepend it with domain.
Yeah, subdomain this,
give it a special
model.
name.
Yeah.
And just to avoid overloading terms, I guess.
Yep. That's a good idea.
So
We have a situation at our company, and we have 3 different teams on 3 different continents working on 3 different pieces of software that make up one product that should serve for one domain, but on each continent, in each country or different states, if we're talking about the US, for the same thing, there is a different term. And each one is the expert, and it's documented on in each country. And if we're talking Europe, for example, we have 2 countries that call the same thing in different words. And it's documented on the national level. The teams that develop software were focusing on different parts, but now they are working on one solution for all of those countries.
Right.
So the question really is how to align those teams and those countries and not offend anyone and not start the holy war about naming.
The magic $6 million question. So I think there's always going to be this struggle when people feel like they own, and it goes back to what I was saying. It's not a personal thing. This is a professional thing. And if you can explain to all the parties, hey, this is where we're at, lay out the struggle, and say, because we're trying to save money, that's always a great driver, right? We're trying to save money and consolidate code, and we can only have one term, one actual terminology word for this definition in this code base. Which of those should we use? And let them decide. This hot button issue, I would not let the technology side decide because they're not the domain experts. But I think you would have to lay the accountability on the domain side and say, I know this is hard, I get it, be empathetic, but we have to have one. And maybe it's not even these 3. Maybe the diplomatic thing is to get a 4th term that none of them thought of and say, hey, could we use this instead? Does this work? I don't know. It just kind of depends on and I get that some cultures are a little more political, but you are going to have to settle on one term, and you are going to want to make sure that the new developers coming in, and we haven't talked about this, but terminology matters because new developers are always fluctuating in, and if you keep that linguistic consistent and real, it's easier for new people to get up to speed with the software that they're having to maintain and advance. So sorry that you have that struggle.
Thank you.
We'll go to the back of the room, and then we'll come back up here.
Yeah, again. So suppose you recognize terminology mismatch, but the wrong meaning is so deeply ingrained in the software that you let's say you would have to rewrite the whole thing. So what would be your advice then?
Depends. I knew that was going to get a laugh. So it depends on how big that software package is. Like, is this like doable within a week or 3, or is this something that would take a year and a half or 3 years? Like how big is this? Is this a monolith? Monolith. Okay. So if it's a monolith, then I would go with the strategy, the strangler pattern, where you would take pieces out and you would make new modules and create messaging and anti-corruption layers that prevent, problems from the translation, but start to slowly shut down the pieces that are no longer needed.
So at no point would you advise for adjusting the terminology for the domain and leave it as it is in the software?
Well, your description originally was that the wrong definition was ingrained throughout the whole system. It was basically the wrong solution. If you could adjust the terminology by just doing a search and destroy mission where you just go and change all the terminology and everything it's the right terms and the definitions are good and everything is good and you can do it really quickly, no, I would stay with it. But if it's truly something that is not, I mean, it's just poorly designed. It doesn't have the domain knowledge at all. And it would take more work to try to refactor a monolith than to start pulling pieces out. And I would go with that direction. And it kind of is a judgment call. I haven't seen your code base, so I don't know, what vertical you're in. I don't know how you've structured this, but I could see some situations where if it's not a complex system, it's like a pretty simple system, but it's big. Well, if it's simple, then maybe we could adjust it. But in my mind, I'm thinking a monolith is pretty complex, and usually monoliths are 80% behavior, and that's hard to refactor. We got one down here. I feel your pain. I had to do this for 2 days, Monday and Tuesday.
What would your guidance be when there are a lot of terms being redefined? Say it's a large list. Do you change them all in one go, or do you kind of break them up into sets? What's your guidance there?
Like how many terms? 5 or 10 or 50 or 100?
Let's say anywhere from 20 to 30.
20 to 30 terms are changing. Is the domain changing because it's got a new market or it's expanding?
Let's just say there's too many clashing terms in that domain, and it needs to be redefined.
Okay. Yeah, so I prioritize the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to repeat a phrase that Kent Beck said at a DDD conference where he said basically, make the change easy, then make the easy change. So I would probably rank those terms in like, is this one a simple one? And can I change that without breaking other things? Okay, let's get all those up front and get those modified, and then get the next ones and figure out, okay, these are a little bit more difficult. What do we need to do to change these? And do we need to do them in a certain order from a dependency perspective? That's where I would go, and then make each one of those changes easy, and then make the easy change. Yeah, that's a good question too. Got one down here.
Do you have any advice for teams that are not working in English? Should the code base still be written in Spanish or?
That's a really good question. I think if the code base is really going to be, primarily supported in Spanish, I would stay with it. If you don't see a need to bring in English-speaking people or other languages. I haven't worked in a foreign language code base. I can imagine what that must be like if you have to understand a domain in a different language than yours. That's got to be pretty difficult. It's not an easy answer. But my hope is that one day there will be a tool that can actually translate your code for you, better than Google Translate. Like it would actually go, okay, I want this code base in English. That would be ideal.
No, where we come from in Norway, we also have 29 letters in the alphabet, so we can't use a lot of those things. Then we have to have kind of like placeholders, so it makes it challenging. So both of us, we work with English code base.
Yeah, that's a unique struggle, but you definitely want to use the domain terms everywhere you can, and then just know that you had to have stop gaps in a couple of areas where that's not feasible. Got one.
Quick question. Say that you are agreeing on English, because you have, sometimes you do that. Then you always has this translations, and then there is always a mismatch in terminology just in the translation, isn't it?
Just between natural languages, right?
Yeah.
Between English and Spanish, for instance.
Have you experienced something like that? How do you resolve that?
Yeah, I haven't had to work I've had to work on software that supported the globe. So I was more into, fixing time issues and date issues and that kind of thing. But I haven't had to really work on semantics between international languages. I grew up in Japan, and there were a lot of words that were in Japanese that were not in English, and back and forth. And I think as the world is getting smaller, we're starting to learn how to make that translation work. And I don't know that we've perfected it, but I think we just keep working at it. The main point is figure out what your domain terminology is in the primary language you're programming in. And if the domain experts are in a different language and you have to do a translation, have at least an agreed upon translation. These are all really good questions. I like them. Okay. Well, that's me. These are some companies I've worked with. If you ever need anything, you can get me on LinkedIn. Just look for John Connolly and DDD, and you'll see me on LinkedIn. And I'd love to answer any other questions you might have. And I appreciate you coming to this talk, and thank you for listening.